I don't know where to start, but I guess I'll dive right in because I need advice. My name's Kevin, and for most of my life, I thought I was doing everything right. I worked hard, loved my wife Ashley, and believed in building something meaningful together. But now, I'm sitting here wondering if my entire life has been a joke. I've been at my job for a decade now, working under Harold, our CEO. He's the kind of guy people either love or hate, a smooth talker, charismatic, but with a reputation for stepping on toes. I gave him my loyalty because I wanted to climb the ladder the right way. Little did I know, while I was putting in overtime and pushing myself to exhaustion, he was sneaking into places he had no business being. It started a few weeks ago. I came home late after a particularly grueling day. Ashley was in the living room, curled up on the couch, scrolling her phone. I didn't think much of it, she was always chatting with her friends. I kissed her on the cheek, asked about her day, and she smiled and told me it was fine. That word would come to haunt me. Later that evening, I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I heard her whispering in the next room. Something about her tone made me pause. I'm not proud of what I did, but I crept closer and strained to listen. "You drive me crazy, you know that," she murmured. "Last night was incredible." My heart stopped. She giggled, and then her voice dropped even lower. "No, he has no idea. He's so busy with his job, he barely notices anything." I froze. I didn't hear a name, but my mind raced through the possibilities. My pulse pounded in my ears as I walked back to our room, acting like I hadn't heard a thing. My thoughts were spinning out of control. Who was she talking to? What the hell was going on? I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, I decided I needed to find out the truth. Over the next week, I started looking for signs. I didn't want to accuse her without proof, it didn't feel right. So, I used my tech skills to dig around. Emails, texts, even our home security cameras. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to know. And that's when I found it. Messages. Explicit ones. Between Ashley and Harold. The man I'd busted my ass for. The man who'd promised me a promotion. He was the one sleeping with my wife. The messages weren't just casual flirtation, they were detailed. Plans to meet at a hotel. Complaints about me, about how I was too clueless to see what was happening right under my nose. I thought I was going to be sick. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started gathering everything, screenshots, video clips, anything I could use. I wanted to be sure there was no way she could gaslight me into thinking I'd imagined it. I had to be certain before I blew up my entire life. And that's where I am now. Sitting here, surrounded by evidence, unsure of my next move. Should I confront her? Harold? Both of them? Should I burn their lives to the ground like they've done to mine? After the shock wore off, if it ever really did, I decided I couldn't act out of pure emotion. I needed a plan. Confronting Ashley without a strategy would just give her the upper hand, and Harold, well, he wasn't the type to roll over and admit defeat. So, I did what any betrayed husband who's also a bit of a tech nerd would do, I doubled down on gathering evidence. First, I pulled every message I could find between Ashley and Harold. Emails, text threads, even voice memos they'd sent each other. Some of it was explicit, graphic, even. I never thought I'd see the woman I loved talking about another man like that, let alone with my boss. But the worst part? The sheer lack of guilt. They weren't just sneaking around, they were reveling in it. Ashley, can't wait for our next meeting. He's been so distracted at work, he won't even notice. Harold, I've got another conference coming up. Let's make it a long one this time. Tell Kevin whatever excuse you need to. It made my blood boil. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of how little respect they had for me. I wasn't even a person to them, I was just an obstacle they had to work around. I started piecing together a timeline. The affair had been going on for months, at least 6, based on their messages. Harold's business trips weren't business at all, and Ashley had been lying about girls' nights and errands more often than I cared to remember. How could I have been so blind? I didn't stop there. My access to the office security system gave me something even more damning: footage. Harold and Ashley meeting late at night, sneaking into the office after hours. It was all there, time-stamped and undeniable. Once I had everything, I sat back and stared at the mountain of evidence in front of me. It wasn't just proof, it was ammunition. But I knew I couldn't use it recklessly. Harold wasn't just my boss, he was the CEO. And Ashley, well, we were still married, for better or worse. If I wanted to blow up their lives, I had to do it strategically. And that's when I got an idea. I'd heard Harold's wife, Kimberly, mentioned a few times in passing. She was rarely seen at office events, but when she was, she exuded quiet power. I didn't know much about her, except that she was rumored to have a significant stake in the company. If Harold was the face of the business, Kimberly was the backbone. She wasn't just his wife, she was his business partner. I wondered if she knew about the affair, about the kind of man Harold really was. If she didn't, I decided she needed to. And if she did, maybe she'd want a way to make him pay just as much as I did. So, I started digging into Kimberly, too. I found her email address and sent her a carefully worded message. Nothing aggressive, nothing accusatory, just a polite request to meet. I didn't want to drop the bomb over email. This kind of betrayal deserved to be handled face to face. To my surprise, she replied within hours. Her response was short and professional: "I'd like to hear what you have to say. Let's meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. at a nearby coffee shop." That night, I didn't sleep. My mind raced with what I would say, how I would present the evidence, and what her reaction might be. Would she believe me? Would she even care? Or would she protect Harold, no matter how much of a scumbag he was? The next afternoon, I walked into the coffee shop, clutching a folder full of printed screenshots and a USB drive with the security footage. Kimberly was already there, seated in the corner, sipping a cappuccino like she didn't have a care in the world. She was as composed and polished as I'd imagined, every bit the savvy businesswoman she was rumored to be. I introduced myself, and after a moment's hesitation, she gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Hendricks," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You said you had something important to discuss?" I slid the folder across the table and said the words that would change everything: "Your husband is having an affair with my wife." Her face didn't betray much, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. "Go on," she said. And that's when I laid it all out. The messages, the footage, the timeline, everything. By the time I finished, her calm exterior had cracked just enough to reveal the fury simmering beneath. "Thank you," she said, her voice icy but controlled. "You've done me a great service today." I didn't know what she meant by that, but I had a feeling Harold's life was about to get a lot more complicated. I walked out of that coffee shop with a strange mix of relief and dread. Kimberly had been calm, too calm, honestly, but there was something in her eyes that told me Harold wasn't going to come out of this unscathed. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. Instead, she'd flipped through the folder, glanced at the screenshots, and watched one particularly damning clip on the USB drive. Then she simply nodded, thanked me, and said, "Leave it to me." That's when I realized, Kimberly wasn't just angry. She was calculating. I didn't hear from her for a couple of days, and during that time, Ashley kept acting like nothing was wrong. She still smiled, still kissed me goodnight, still scrolled her phone with that same fake casualness. It made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay composed. I needed her to believe I was none the wiser. Then, out of the blue, Kimberly emailed me. The message was brief: "Thank you for your cooperation. The wheels are in motion. Let's meet again soon to discuss next steps." Next steps? I didn't know what she had in mind, but I wasn't about to let my curiosity get the better of me. The thought of Harold finally facing consequences for his actions kept me grounded. A few days later, Kimberly and I met again, this time in her lawyer's office. When I walked in, she was seated at the head of a long conference table, dressed sharply in a dark blazer. Her lawyer sat to her left, and another man, her financial advisor, I guessed, was on her right. She waved me to a chair across from her, and I suddenly felt like I was in a corporate boardroom, not a personal vendetta meeting. "Thank you for coming," Kimberly said. "I wanted you to know that I've verified everything you shared with me. Harold has been less discreet than he thinks he is." Her tone was cold, almost detached, and it sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't just angry. She was ready to destroy him. "Here's what I'm planning," she continued. "I'm filing for divorce. But more importantly, I'm leveraging the evidence you provided to secure majority ownership of the company." I blinked. "You can do that?" Harold was foolish enough to involve company resources in his affair. Hotel bills, expenses disguised as business meetings, even using the office after hours, it all constitutes misuse of corporate funds. With the evidence we've collected, I can not only secure the divorce settlement I want but also argue for his removal as CEO. I felt a mix of vindication and awe. Kimberly wasn't just taking Harold down, she was obliterating his entire life. And I couldn't help but feel a little impressed. "And what about Ashley?" I asked hesitantly. Kimberly gave me a pointed look. "That's your battle to fight. But if I were you, I wouldn't waste much time deciding." The meeting wrapped up quickly after that, and I left with a strange sense of closure. Kimberly had a plan, and I trusted her to follow through. Now, it was time for me to handle my end of things. That evening, I walked into the house and found Ashley in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She smiled when she saw me, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Her hands froze mid-chop, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Whatever it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by her usual mask of indifference. "About what?" she asked, her tone light, but her shoulders tense. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened one of the incriminating videos, and placed it on the counter in front of her. Her face went pale as the clip played. "Ashley," I said quietly, "how long have you been lying to me?" She didn't answer at first. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was searching for an excuse, a way out. But the evidence was too damning, too clear. "It's not what it looks like," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Not what it looks like? You've been screwing Harold, Ashley. My boss. 4 months. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." She started to cry then, big dramatic sobs that would have broken my heart a few weeks ago. But now, they just made me feel empty. "Kevin, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I love you." "Save it," I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. "You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choices. And now you're going to face the consequences." She begged. She pleaded. She swore it would never happen again. But I wasn't listening. I'd already made my decision. "Ashley," I said firmly, cutting her off mid-apology. "Pack your things. I want you out by tomorrow." And just like that, the marriage I'd once cherished was over. The next morning, Ashley was still in the house. She'd spent the night in the guest room, probably hoping I'd cool off and we could talk it out. But I wasn't interested in talking anymore. I had given her my ultimatum, and now it was time to see if she'd take me seriously. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. She hadn't slept much, judging by the pile of crumpled tissues scattered around her. When I walked in, she looked up at me with this desperate, almost pitiful expression, like she thought I might cave. "Kevin," she started, her voice hoarse. "Please, let's just talk about this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away." I set my coffee mug down a little harder than I intended and crossed my arms. You threw it away, Ashley. The moment you decided to crawl into bed with Harold, you ended this marriage. I'm just finalizing the paperwork. Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I'd spent too many nights wondering what I'd done wrong, why she'd grown distant, only to realize it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her selfishness. I didn't want to hurt you, she choked out between sobs. I laughed bitterly. Didn't want to hurt me? That's rich. You knew exactly what you were doing, Ashley. Don't pretend otherwise. She tried to argue, to make excuses, but I wasn't having it. I'd wasted enough time on her lies. I want you gone by tonight, I said firmly. You can take whatever you need, but I want you out of this house. I've already called a lawyer. That shut her up. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, without another word, she got up and started packing. Meanwhile, things were escalating on Harold's end. Word spread quickly that Kimberly had filed for divorce and was taking legal action to secure a majority stake in the company. I didn't know all the details, but I heard whispers around the office about how Harold had been seen storming out of meetings, yelling at his assistant, and generally unraveling. It was only a matter of time before the board stepped in. A week later, Kimberly called me. It's done, she said simply. What do you mean? I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. Harold has been removed as CEO. The board sided with me after I presented the evidence. He won't be coming back. I didn't know what to say. After months of feeling powerless, I finally had some semblance of justice. Harold had been untouchable for so long, but now his empire was crumbling around him. There's more, Kimberly added. I want you to take his place. I nearly dropped my phone. What? You're loyal, hardworking, and you clearly have a moral compass, something Harold was sorely lacking, she said. The board trusts me to make this decision, and I trust you. So, what do you say? I didn't answer right away. It was a lot to process. But after everything I'd been through, the thought of stepping into Harold's shoes, of running the company with integrity and fixing the mess he'd left behind, felt like the ultimate redemption. I'll do it, I said finally. Thank you. You've earned it, Kimberly replied. Welcome to the top, Kevin. Part 4, the fallout. The next morning, Ashley was still in the house. She'd spent the night in the guest room, probably hoping I'd cool off and we could talk it out. But I wasn't interested in talking anymore. I had given her my ultimatum, and now it was time to see if she'd take me seriously. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. She hadn't slept much, judging by the pile of crumpled tissues scattered around her. When I walked in, she looked up at me with this desperate, almost pitiful expression, like she thought I might cave. Kevin, she started, her voice hoarse. Please, let's just talk about this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away. I set my coffee mug down a little harder than I intended and crossed my arms. You threw it away, Ashley. The moment you decided to crawl into bed with Harold, you ended this marriage. I'm just finalizing the paperwork. Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I'd spent too many nights wondering what I'd done wrong, why she'd grown distant, only to realize it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her selfishness. I didn't want to hurt you, she choked out between sobs. I laughed bitterly. Didn't want to hurt me? That's rich. You knew exactly what you were doing, Ashley. Don't pretend otherwise. She tried to argue, to make excuses, but I wasn't having it. I'd wasted enough time on her lies. I want you gone by tonight, I said firmly. You can take whatever you need, but I want you out of this house. I've already called a lawyer. That shut her up. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, without another word, she got up and started packing. Meanwhile, things were escalating on Harold's end. Word spread quickly that Kimberly had filed for divorce and was taking legal action to secure a majority stake in the company. I didn't know all the details, but I heard whispers around the office about how Harold had been seen storming out of meetings, yelling at his assistant, and generally unraveling. It was only a matter of time before the board stepped in. A week later, Kimberly called me. "It's done," she said simply. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Harold has been removed as CEO. The board sided with me after I presented the evidence. He won't be coming back." I didn't know what to say. After months of feeling powerless, I finally had some semblance of justice. Harold had been untouchable for so long, but now his empire was crumbling around him. "There's more," Kimberly added. "I want you to take his place." I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" "You're loyal, hardworking, and you clearly have a moral compass, something Harold was sorely lacking," she said. "The board trusts me to make this decision, and I trust you. So, what do you say?" I didn't answer right away. It was a lot to process. But after everything I'd been through, the thought of stepping into Harold's shoes, of running the company with integrity and fixing the mess he'd left behind, felt like the ultimate redemption. "I'll do it," I said finally. "Thank you." "You've earned it," Kimberly replied. "Welcome to the top, Kevin." That night, I sat alone in the house, sipping a glass of whiskey and reflecting on how much my life had changed in such a short time. Ashley was gone. Harold was ruined. And I was about to step into a role I'd only dreamed of. But as satisfying as it was to see justice served, there was still a heaviness in my chest, a reminder of the love I'd lost, the trust that had been shattered. Moving forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of another. And this time, I was determined to write it my way. A few days after Ashley moved out, I thought I'd seen the last of her. She had taken most of her belongings, leaving behind only a few trinkets that I stuffed into a box and planned to drop off later. The house felt quieter, emptier, but also lighter, like the weight of her lies had been lifted off my shoulders. I was starting to imagine what life could be like without her, without the constant shadow of suspicion and deceit. But Ashley wasn't done with me. It started with texts. Long, rambling messages about how sorry she was, how she'd made a terrible mistake, and how she still loved me. I ignored them. Then came the phone calls. At first, they were sporadic, but when I didn't answer, she began leaving voicemails, her voice trembling with desperation. "Kevin, please, just let me explain. I know I messed up, but we can work through this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw us away." I deleted every voicemail without listening to the end. The audacity of her pleas only fueled my anger. After everything she'd done, she still thought she had a chance at reconciliation? Then, one evening, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it to find Ashley standing there, I was too stunned to speak. She looked disheveled, her hair unkempt, her makeup smeared like she'd been crying. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Kevin," she said, her voice cracking. "I needed to see you. I miss you." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The last thing I wanted was for her to set foot in my home again. "Ashley, you need to leave. There's nothing left to say." "Please, Kevin, just hear me out," she begged. "It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't even know why I did it." I folded my arms, staring at her with disbelief. "You don't know why you did it? You cheated on me with my boss for months, Ashley. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Over and over again." Her tears started falling then, but they didn't move me. I'd seen those tears before, and I knew they were just another manipulation tactic. "I'll do whatever it takes," she sobbed. "Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just give me one more chance." I shook my head. "Ashley, you didn't just betray me. You humiliated me. You took everything we built together and set it on fire. There's no coming back from that." She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, her hand falling uselessly to her side. "Kevin, please," she whispered. "I love you." I laughed bitterly. "If this is love, Ashley, I don't want it." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the messages, the sneaking around, the lies, and any sympathy I had evaporated. "You need to move on," I said firmly. "Because I already have." While Ashley's attempts at reconciliation dwindled, Harold's downfall was accelerating at full speed. Kimberly wasn't just stripping him of his position and assets, she was dismantling his reputation piece by piece. Word of his affair spread through the company like wildfire, thanks to a few well-placed leaks. Employees whispered about the disgraced CEO, and clients started pulling out of deals, unwilling to associate with the scandal. Harold, once the untouchable leader of the company, was now a pariah. I ran into him one last time, purely by accident. I was walking into the building, my building now, and he was leaving, carrying a box of his belongings. He looked like a shell of the man he used to be, his suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes hollow. When he saw me, he sneered. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Kevin. You think you're better than me? You're just a replacement." I stared at him for a long moment before responding. "No, Harold. I'm a better man than you ever were. And you know it." He muttered something under his breath and stormed off, disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go, feeling nothing but relief that he was finally out of my life. With Harold gone and Ashley out of the picture, I threw myself into my new role as CEO. It wasn't just about proving I could do the job, it was about reclaiming my sense of purpose and rebuilding my life. Kimberly became an unexpected ally, offering guidance and support as I navigated the complexities of running a company. Over time, we developed a mutual respect, even friendship. But it wasn't just my professional life that was thriving. For the first time in years, I started focusing on myself, my hobbies, my friends, and the possibilities that lay ahead. I wasn't ready to date again, but I knew that someday, I would be. And when that day came, I'd approach it with the honesty and respect that Ashley had never given me. Because I deserved better. And now, I was finally ready to claim it. Weeks turned into months, and my life began to settle into a new normal. The company was stabilizing under my leadership, and I was finally finding peace in my personal life. But just when I thought I was done with the drama, a new curveball came my way. Ashley wasn't ready to let go. It started with a mutual friend mentioning her in passing. Apparently, Ashley had been telling people that we were working through things, which couldn't have been further from the truth. I had cut off all contact with her, but the rumors she was spreading were threatening to drag me back into the chaos I was trying to leave behind. Then came the email. A long, rambling apology mixed with veiled accusations. She claimed I'd overreacted and that I'd abandoned her when she was at her most vulnerable. It was so full of manipulation and self-pity that I couldn't help but laugh. Did she really think I'd buy into her narrative after everything she'd done? I ignored the email, hoping she'd get the message. But instead, she escalated. One night, I came home to find her car parked outside my house. She was sitting on the front steps, shivering in the cold, waiting for me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice laced with frustration. "I needed to see you," she said, standing up. "We need to talk, Kevin." "There's nothing to talk about, Ashley. We're done. You need to accept that." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they didn't faze me. "Kevin, please," she said. "I've lost everything. You were my whole world, and I made a mistake. A huge mistake." "Can't we just know?" I interrupted, my tone firm. We can't. You didn't just make a mistake, Ashley. You made a series of choices that destroyed everything we had. I'm not going to let you drag me back into your mess. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I stood there for a moment, watching her, before stepping past her to unlock the door. You should leave, I said quietly. There's nothing left for you here. While Ashley's attempts to reconcile were pathetic at best, Harold's reaction to his downfall was much more volatile. He wasn't just bitter, he was vengeful. One morning, Kimberly called me, her voice tight with frustration. Harold's trying to file a wrongful termination lawsuit, she said. He's claiming that we conspired to ruin him. I groaned. Of course, Harold wouldn't go down quietly. Does he have any real grounds? None, Kimberly replied. But he's desperate, and he's trying to leverage whatever he can to get some kind of settlement. I spent the next few weeks working closely with Kimberly and the company's legal team to counter Harold's baseless claims. He was throwing everything he could at us, hoping something would stick. But Kimberly was ruthless, and with the evidence we had, Harold didn't stand a chance. Eventually, the case was dismissed, and Harold was forced to accept the reality of his situation. He was broke, disgraced, and out of options. The last I heard, he was living in a dingy apartment and selling off his assets to stay afloat. It was a fitting end for a man who had built his career on lies and manipulation. As the dust settled, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I'd learned from everything I'd been through. Betrayal has a way of making you question everything, your instincts, your judgment, even your own worth. But it also teaches you about resilience and the importance of setting boundaries. I started seeing a therapist, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to make sure I was truly moving forward. I didn't want to carry the baggage of Ashley's betrayal into my future relationships. I wanted to be open, honest, and ready to trust again when the time was right. Kimberly and I continued to work closely together, and our professional partnership grew into a genuine friendship. She was the one who reminded me that not everyone was like Ashley or Harold, and that there were still good people in the world. People who valued loyalty, integrity, and kindness. Months later, I found myself in a completely different place emotionally, professionally, and even physically. I'd sold the house I'd shared with Ashley and bought a new one, a place that felt like my own. It was a fresh start in every sense of the word. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes, my phone buzzed with a message from Kimberly. You free for dinner next week? There's someone I think you should meet. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Maybe it was time to let someone new into my life. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something good. The following week, I met Kimberly for dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. When I walked in, she was already there, seated across from a woman I didn't recognize. Kimberly waved me over, and I felt a pang of nervousness. Was this really happening? After everything, was I ready for something new? Kevin, this is Claire, Kimberly said, standing up to make introductions. Claire's been working with me on some recent charity initiatives. I thought you two might have a lot to talk about. Claire stood and extended her hand, her smile warm and genuine. She was striking in a subtle way, her beauty wasn't showy, but it was the kind of effortless elegance that instantly put me at ease. It's nice to meet you, she said. You too, I replied, shaking her hand. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Claire had a sharp wit and an easy laugh, and as we talked, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't in months. She told me about her work with underprivileged youth, and I shared some of my own experiences balancing corporate life with finding purpose beyond the office. There was no pressure, no awkwardness, just two people getting to know each other. By the time dessert came, I realized I'd been smiling more in the past 2 hours than I had in months. As we said our goodbyes, Kimberly gave me a knowing look. Call her, she whispered before walking off, leaving me standing there with Claire. Well, Claire said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, this was fun. It was, I agreed. Would you want to do it again sometime? Just the two of us? Her smile widened. I'd like that. Just as things were starting to look up, Ashley decided to rear her head one last time. It had been months since I'd last seen or spoken to her, but apparently, the universe wasn't ready to give me peace just yet. I came home one evening to find a letter slipped under my door. It was from Ashley. My heart sank as I opened it, unsure if I even wanted to read what she had to say. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was long, full of apologies and justifications. She admitted to the affair again, claiming it was a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control. She wrote about how much she missed me, how she'd realized too late what she'd lost, and how she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her. But then, as if on cue, she turned the tables, trying to make me feel guilty. She blamed my long hours, my obsession with work, and my emotional distance for pushing her into Harold's arms. It was classic Ashley, manipulative and self-serving. I didn't even finish reading. I tore the letter in half and tossed it in the trash. I was done letting her occupy space in my mind. As the months passed, my life continued to transform. The company was thriving under my leadership, and I was finally finding balance between work and personal life. Kimberly had become not just a mentor but a true friend, and Claire and I had started seeing each other regularly. Dating Claire was a completely different experience than being with Ashley. There were no games, no lies, no hidden agendas. She was open, honest, and supportive in ways I didn't realize I'd been missing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could truly be myself. One evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You're not the same man you were when we met." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious. "You were carrying so much weight," she said softly. "Now, it's like you've let it go. You seem lighter, happier." I smiled, reaching for her hand. "That's because I am." The final piece of closure came when Harold and Ashley's worlds collided in the most ironic way. Rumors spread that Harold had been trying to rekindle his relationship with Kimberly, desperate for a way back into her good graces. At the same time, Ashley had been spotted at events, trying to cozy up to people she thought could help her climb back into society. Neither succeeded. Harold was blacklisted in the business world, and Ashley quickly became a cautionary tale among her social circle. It was poetic, really, two people who had built their lives on lies and manipulation, left with nothing but each other's wreckage. As for me, I had no interest in their fates. I was too busy building a future, one rooted in honesty, integrity, and genuine connection. Because life, I realized, wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about letting go, moving on, and embracing the people and opportunities that truly mattered. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.